Joining us now is Ryan Grimm. Ryan, as you probably know, is Washington editor of The Intercept, where he's been doing great work for a long time now. And his latest book is entitled The Squad, AOC, and the Hope of a Political Revolution. Eminently readable and filled with interesting stuff. So I thought we'd have him on to talk about it. So, first of all, Ryan, thanks for coming back on the program.
Delighted to be here.
Well, we're delighted to have you. And your book seems to, I think it came out maybe first week in December.
That's right.
And it seems to me to be very timely for a couple reasons. Uh, One of which is that since uh, October 7th, the Democratic Party seems to be fracturing in certain ways, particularly between its older leaders and its younger voters and voters of color and so on, around issues like support for Israel. And the squad has potentially a great role to play here, but it seems to me it's kind of a pivotal historic moment for the squad, in that they're having to once again define their role within the party and yet pushing their party and how to balance those two interests. Does that make any sense to you?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So,
And a significant amount of the book is about the way that pro-Israel money flooded into the party in increasing amounts in the last couple cycles, specifically and explicitly as a response to the squad to try to neutralize the rise of a progressive wing that was more skeptical of the unconditional support for Israel. And so it was all well positioned for this conflict.
absolutely. And you find uh, a lot of struggling on the part of the squad to deal with this. You have people who were running as squad adjacent, maybe, or potentially squad
Mm-hmm.
members of Congress who were utterly swamped in the face of massive donations. Correct me if I'm wrong, but many of which I think came from what were normally Republican donors, as well as APAC in general and other affiliated groups. And then you had people like Summer Lee in Pennsylvania who managed to beat back this flood of money, but no doubt are worried about upcoming. And just this morning, I was reading an article about Cori Bush, of course, great member of the squad and prominent voice for the left in Congress. According to this poll, which was granted by a Republican polling group, says she is trailing her primary challenger by 22 points. The primary challenger, Wesley Bell, taking the lead. And I wanted to ask you whether, having written the book on the squad, whether this race was a harbinger in any way.
I think so. And Jamal Bowman facing a really tough race too, and he's also going to face redistricting probably from New York State Democrats, which if you're a betting man, you've got to be betting on George Latimer when it comes to who's going to come out on top in the redistricting. So much of these races, when they get redrawn, just it doesn't matter what the candidates do. If you draw a district this way, one guy's going to win. If you draw it another way, another guy's going to win. But yes, in St. Louis, Wesley Bell was running for Senate before October 7th. He's a progressive prosecutor. I think he had Soros backing. We wrote about his original race. He threw out the old guard in St. Louis when it came to the very cop friendly prosecution that they had at the time. But he very clearly saw after October 7th that if he jumped in against Bush, there would be a bottomless well of support, of financial support for anybody who challenged Cori Bush. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden APAC loves progressive prosecutors. It just means that they don't like Cori Bush. And he has been vocal about the righteousness of Israel and it's like that Israel has the right to defend itself, and he's been saying the things that send the signal to APAC that if you spend here, you'll be spending on an ally against against a critic. And they were actually, APAC was actually their super PAC. I'd never seen this before, was spending money against Cori Bush before Bush even had an opponent, just just to like take down her numbers. So
So they were
she's
running
in real
negative ads and things like that.
right, right. Before there was even a vote for this person instead. They were trying to, basically softening the ground to show somebody, if you get in, there's money behind you. Because for candidates, raising money is the hardest and worst part of it, unless you're a psycho that just loves being on the phone with these rich people.
Right, right.
For most of them, that's the thing that they don't want to do. And if you tell them, hey, all you're going to have to do is say that Israel has a right to defend itself, and you're going to have $10 million super PAC, dropping bombs on the air, then a candidate's like, okay, that sounds more fun than like guaranteed losing a Missouri Senate race. Like Wesley Bell's running. When you run for Senate in Missouri as a Democrat, for the most part, you're running to kind of get your name out there. You have some future ambitions that might serve, but you don't really think you're going to win the Senate race in Missouri. So now all of a sudden he can be a member of Congress.
Right, right, and really build his profile. And in a way, one of the reasons why I glommed on the Cori Bush race this morning, Ryan, was that it, I don't want to diminish Bell's record as a progressive prosecutor, and progressive prosecutors do great work. But your book begins with a description of a moment in history I remember all too well as one of
Mm-hmm.
Bernie Sanders' first, I think I was employee number 5 or something. Um, the way that identity politics was deployed to bring down a comprehensive progressive platform that includes identity justice and social justice, but adds economic justice. That split that was played on pretty artfully by the Hillary Clinton campaign. It was traumatic to read it again in a way, with the help of the press, of course, and some supposedly social justice groups and so on. That split seems to be almost resurfacing. It can even be used again. The play against Bernie was he's an old white man, and his supporters were supposedly young white bros, totally disproven by the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Majority female, slightly very multiracial, and so on. But that was the rap. But even against a black member of Congress like Cori Bush, it seems to me that they're finding new ways to deploy identity to take down this sort of comprehensive left agenda of the squad at all. Does that make sense to you?
It does for sure. And I'm curious, from your perspective, like when you noticed that it seemed to be a deliberate strategy rather than just something you saw kind of playing out, from the Hillary Clinton campaign to say that Bernie Sanders is a one issue candidate. Hilariously, the one issue is like how well you're doing in your
Right.
life.
Can you
I feel like
survive? Yeah.
pretty big issue.
Right.
Like, but okay, he's one issue candidate. And the thing that breaking up the banks won't end racism, breaking up the banks won't end Islamophobia. She doesn't fill in the blank on how she's going to end
Right.
racism, end Islamophobia and homophobia and on and on. But her point is that she talks about it, and then she talks about it in a more sophisticated way than he does, and so therefore she's actually the most progressive candidate. But I'm curious, like how you guys internally saw it unfolding, and when you recognized, oh, this is a thing, and when you recognized that it was actually kind of damaging, like landing for some voters,
Well,
because
okay.
running in a Democratic primary is tricky.
Okay. So I'm supposed to be interviewing you, but
Yeah.
I'm happy to answer. And I actually have never talked about this publicly, but I had been, and Bernie will probably be mad that I bring it up, but I had been pestering him for weeks to add a social justice and civil rights page to the website. And I'd sent it finally, we went out to dinner at one of the lousy restaurants he used to like to frequent.
Yeah.
In this case,
Yeah.
of a terrible Thai restaurant that's gone in Union Station. And I showed it to him. He said, "This is pretty good. Who wrote it?" Who wrote it? I've sent it to you 3 times. He said, "Let me think about it." A week went past. We went to Netroots Nation,
Mm,
and Black Lives Matter protested Martin O'Malley and then Bernie. Um, and they say they would have protested Hillary if she had made herself accessible in any venue.
right.
I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if there were some arrangements. I honestly don't know the background.
Right.
But I've wondered, to be honest. And from that moment on, uh, I think they saw an opportunity and jumped on it. If they hadn't seen it before,
Hmm.
they saw it then. That the story didn't become Black Lives Matter protests the two available presidential candidates and asked them to center Black lives. The protest became Black people don't like Bernie.
Right.
And they played on that big time. You write in the book about, breaking up the big banks won't end
Right.
racism. Uh, no, taking billy clubs out of Bull Connor and his deputies won't end racism either, but it'll help a lot of black people from getting hurt,
Right.
which is what
Should probably still do it. Yeah.
right, which is what breaking up the banks would do. And I think they saw a huge opportunity there. I think they played it for all it was worth. I think at that point there was uh, probably the most heartbreaking moment for me personally was when you and I we follow campaigns, so we know when there's a talking
Hmm.
point coming out.
Hmm.
And this was a couple months later, but the talking point became Bernie was never at the civil rights demonstrations. And somebody produced a
Mm.
picture of Bernie as a student being arrested at a student rights demonstration. They said, that's not really Bernie. It was really Bernie. Then the heartbreaker for me was when John Lewis said, I never saw him there.
Right.
A state he used the talking point for which he later apologized to his credit. But I mean, I think it became an all-out matter. It reminded me a lot of the Clinton Obama race when initially the Clinton campaign first tried to disqualify Obama as not really black.
Hmm.
If you remember that,
Oh,
they had
yes.
certain spokespeople say he hasn't lived the African American experience because his father was African and he was raised by uh, a white family. Um, and uh, and then, of course, Bill Clinton's infamous comment that it doesn't matter if you win South Carolina because that's the black vote anyway. And Geraldine Ferraro's comment when she was an official committee co-chair, and I know that's a honorific as much as anything else, that it's not his turn, which coming from blue collar Rust Belt America, I recognize as long-standing racist language. Those black fellas, Richie, you know, they want your uncle's job down at the factory. It's not their turn. They don't want to wait their turn. So, so I think it was part of a long-standing cynical strategy to use race. And candidly, and Bernie will be mad at me for this too, I think he was slow to respond to it. And he should have gotten right on it. And the one thing everybody was able to agree on, I think, in the campaign, except Bernie, was that Black Twitter was hilarious. Do you remember Black Twitter? Uh,
Oh, yes.
this was, of course, a bunch of hashtags, mostly among Black Twitter users. The most famous one, Bernie so black, that he blank, blank, blank. It was very funny, but it was a painful time, and some of us recognized it earlier than others, I guess I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can recognize the deeply cynical nature of it, and you can see how calculating it was from the Clinton campaign. And they must have known that Bernie has this stubborn streak to him, and that they were going to be able to push him on this, and then he would just dig in
Right.
because Bernie's hard to explain without understanding an irrational stubbornness, because you'd be like, why don't you just, you believe in all of these things, social justice, racial justice, you fought for them your whole life, just put them on your website. But telling him to do something is the thing that'll get him to not do
Right,
it,
right,
which is not rational.
right,
It's just who he is.
right. Uh,
And it's part of the thing, without that, he doesn't become the stubborn grandpa that everybody loves because he stuck to his guns for 50 years over this, with the same positions in the face of the neoliberal turn of the Democratic Party. And so people admired that about him. And it's almost unfair to ask somebody to have, precisely the amount of stubbornness that you want, but no more. It was both his gift and his curse.
right. No, I mean, at times it was great because it was borderline punk in a good way. Until I read your book, I had forgotten that at that April 2015 press conference on the lawn where he announced his candidacy, he said to the press, "Let's get this over quickly because I don't
Yeah.
have a lot of time." I mean, that's the
Yeah.
best of
This is opening line
the best
of his
Bernie.
presidential campaign.
And I
Yes.
was in with some of the other media, maybe you were there too, when he did the town hall with Rachel Maddow, and she asked him what job would he want if he wasn't in politics. Do you remember that? He said
No, what did he
president of
say?
CNN because you wouldn't have the crap on that you have now. And the whole press corps just cracked up. I mean, it was it was irresistible. In fact, I would argue that Bernie, and this is a good segue to the next topic I wanted to talk to you about, Ryan. I would argue that Bernie in 2020, I was not a part of that campaign, uh, that Bernie in 2020 maybe accommodated too much. That he was not, I mean, yes, you saw that stubbornness. Both times that Black Lives Matter interrupted him, they said, well, he was rude to these black women. Like, well, you should see him with his staff if you think that's rude. But if you don't want me to talk, I'll leave. I mean, that's classic
Right.
Bernie. But
Right.
I think, his efforts at accommodations didn't always serve him well. Uh, but I guess why that's a segue for me, Ryan Grimm, is because uh, I think the squad has struggled with that at times. That's my perception, but I'd love to know your thoughts. I think that it's hard for them to figure out to what extent they are, in the Democratic Party, but not of it, as Thoreau said of the
Mm.
world, and to what extent they're really Democratic party politicians. The fact that so many of them, I think all of them, as far as I can tell, endorsed Joe Biden very early. It surprised me a little bit. I think they've struggled. AOC certainly publicly struggled with Iron Dome funding for Israel and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you think I'm being unfair to them at all by saying that I think they struggle to find their footing in that balance?
No, I think that's right. And I think the book goes into like why that is, how they've grappled with that and how that's unfolded. Um, no, I think you're right. I think, the one of the truer things AOC said was at one point, she said, Joe Biden in any other country, Joe Biden and I wouldn't be in the same party.
Right.
We have this two-party system, first past the post, where everyone from the middle over here is on one side, and then from the middle over here is on the other side, and that's a huge spectrum. Whereas, yes, in some other country, he'd be a Christian Democrat,
Right.
and she'd be a social democrat or whatever, and they'd sometimes be in coalition, and other times Joe Biden's party would join with center right parties and form like a right wing party. Um, Other times the left wing might join some populist right wing on some issue. It's scrambled. But here you have this zero sum system, where you get into Congress and you're told, like we're either in the majority and you have some power, or we're in the minority and you have none, and it's just zero sum. If Republicans win, you lose. If we win, they lose. And that logic very quickly leads you to becoming, much more partisan than than your supporters are. Um,
Right.
so yeah, and that I think also like the daily interactions with Republicans probably play an under discussed role in furthering some of that partisanship. Jamal Bowman talked to me about being in orientation and looking over and seeing like I can't remember if Madison Cawthorn was in his class, but definitely Marjorie Taylor Greene was in his class, and he's seeing like all these psychos in person,
Right.
and feeling like asking, "Are they armed?" Like, like
Right.
these are like curious and frightening creatures to some of these members of Congress who are, more accustomed to fighting with centrist Democrats. Um,
Right.
and then and so are a lot of their supporters. Like our media system pulls together people that are closer to each other. So we're tangling with the center left on whatever platform that we're on, less than we're tangling with the like Klan members.
Yeah.
Then when you come to Congress and you look around and see a bunch of Klan folks, you're like, oh, this is interesting. This is a serious fight.
Right. And that's actually a great point, Ryan, because you cover the Hill a lot. Close family member of mine, I won't out him, but if you Google search would be easy to find, covers the Hill full time. And regardless of his politics, which you can imagine, given his DNA or not, unlike mine, but uh, he just says, these people are terrifying. And I mean, he
Right.
interviews them, he gets them to open up. He's a great interviewer, but these are genuinely scary people. So you have that push and pull, and vicariously through friends like you and through family who work on the Hill, I get the same thing, which is I am at this point very alienated from the Democratic Party, but terrified of these people.
Right.
So I mean they're crazy. So how does one articulate? Has anyone, in your opinion, let me phrase it this way: has anyone struck the right balance on the Hill in terms of uh, articulating? I'm to the left of this party. I disagree with this party on a lot of things, but I do not want to. We need to understand the nature of the people we're up against.
It's hard because that line has been used cynically for so many
Right.
years. Like we've been told that the barbarians are at the gate, for 100 years or more, but sometimes they are at the gate, like
Right. Right.
and sometimes they're inside the gates,
Right.
and it's very hard, I think, for people to discern the when there's a wolf and when there's not a wolf, because we've
Yeah.
cried wolf so many times.
Right.
So I think it's pretty tough.
And there's also a disconnect, I would say, and it's a messaging problem for Democrats that on the one hand, democracy is hanging in the balance, but on the other, nobody is challenging an unpopular candidate with
Right.
major negatives. If it's that critical, one would think they'd do something about that. So I don't know. I don't know exactly where that goes, but does the squad or the Congressional Progressive Caucus or anybody else, do they have a strategy for articulating where they fit into this ecosystem? I'm thinking, for example, about the outrage and the furious debate of a couple of years ago on force the vote. I
Mhm.
remember force the vote, of course, and that was on Medicare for all. I thought they should have forced the vote on increasing Social Security since virtually every Democratic member
Right, and that could pass.
it would have passed. Yeah,
And,
but
right.
but um, and then of course they betrayed us, and AOC is a traitor, and all that. As opposed to, look, there's an ecosystem. Activists are a part of it. Commentators are a part of it. Electeds are a part of it. Yeah, I've had private conversations with electeds who understand this, Pramila Jayapal or other people who have come out of the activist world. But is there any sense that the House left, as we would define it, has a kind of a manifesto or can create one?
Not really. I think that at this point, there's a pretty there's a pretty broken relationship between the kind of online basis support that existed that kind of grew around the first Bernie Sanders campaign and then flowed into the squad in the second Sanders campaign, and the squad themselves. I think, I mean, for the one hand, there's a real gap between what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. They're voting constantly, interacting with their colleagues, like they're becoming part of this institution. Whereas the outside energy is operating on a higher on like a more 30,000 foot
Right.
plane. They're not following every single vote or every single amendment or fights to get amendments or committee seats and so that just creates a natural distance. And there's also no organized mechanism to pull the things together. And there was nobody that really put one together. I write about how AOC's more radical staff in the first half of her term were pushing to get her and Bernie and the rest of the squad to team up and do joint fundraising, so that every time Hillary Clinton attacked them or Obama singled them out or something, that they'd raise $1 million and then spread it around on candidates that were sympathetic to their views. But that would have been a much more confrontational approach. The only way you could have done it is if AOC used all of her lobbying powers to talk Bernie into it, because Bernie has a lot of respect for her. Otherwise he would not.
Talking Bernie.
That's not something that he right.
And you have now a party that seems, the party's made a series of decisions. I mean, it's certainly old guard leaders like Hillary Clinton. She can't get over Bernie. She blames Bernie for everything. The party is the one that allows dark money into the primaries, which is altering the nature of the party itself. Does the squad have a future?
I think that there is a strong public demand for that kind of politics, and so it's not going away. And I think the Democratic electorate may just continue to get more and more progressive over the years. So in that sense, yes. But meanwhile, they're kind of also moving a little bit closer to the Democratic electorate. So I don't foresee a kind of Freedom Caucus version ever kind of really forming. Somebody should, man, if I had endless amounts of time, I would go do a deep dive into Rhode Island, because the Rhode Island left tried to basically do a Freedom Caucus version of leftism in the state legislature, and it was just a spectacular failure, and spectacular
In a really bad.
in all of the ways. Yes, right. It's implosions and finger pointing, and because so much of it revolves around like beef and like YouTube personalities and podcasts and the same is true on the right, by the way. And so that's why like you have all of these intense psychodramas playing out on the right, with people calling themselves names, people calling each other names, because it's just radio hosts getting into radio host beefs to drive ratings. You've watched it play out in the industry for decades, and now it's like hypercharged into with what we don't have yet on the Democratic side. For the most part, Republicans all have their own podcasts and YouTube shows now, like their own shows.
Right. Mike Johnson, all of them,
yeah, and they use those shows to attack other Republicans, because that's what people want in their, like that's what gives them the dopamine hit, and then the bigger YouTube numbers. And so, Rhode Island tried that more kind of YouTube slash nihilistic version, and it just Freedom Caucus style stuff, and it just absolutely collapsed in a complete heap of acrimony.
Well, it's going to be interesting to watch with an election year coming up. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And before I let you go, just real quickly, since I interviewed Imran Khan of Pakistan, you interviewed Khan, and have done you and The Intercept have done a lot of reporting on it. The military and probably U.S. interests and so on have rigged the recent election every way they could. Khan's in jail. Basically, the number of charges against him is the Urdu equivalent of a gajinti billion. You know, they're just going to throw as many charges against him as they can. His wife has been convicted. And they cut off the cell phone service on the day of the election for many hours.
Yes.
They did whatever they could, and yet they banned his party, so all his candidates had to run as independents. And yet they're doing pretty well. Now, I know there are complicated ins and outs about allocated seats and so on in Pakistan, but what's the latest? It looks like maybe two or three of the other groups are going to try to form a coalition and they'll rig it that way. But does this augur ongoing instability in Pakistan? Will they have to make some kind of accommodation with Khan? Do we not know yet?
Uh, Probably instability. Yes. The latest reporting out of Pakistan is that Donald Blum, the U.S. ambassador, is saying, "Look, just give me a couple of weeks, and I will straighten this out." It's very like straight up Cold War, retconning onto the situation. It's almost funny to watch. It's not funny because it's a democracy that is being pulled apart at the seams for U.S. geopolitical advantage. But to see these pathologies of the Cold War being reenacted in 2024 is just so weird. Like it's not like it used to be. If the CIA wanted some type of change to take place, they would manipulate social media, the media, get people out into the streets, and then boom, do a coup. With a little color revolution type
Right,
thing,
right.
like that was our kind of modern understanding of how we went about doing this. They've gone all the way back to the 60s and 70s, just straight up, not even producing any inorganic street stuff, and just having the ambassador try to play games with their democracy. So yeah, we'll see if that's still doable in 2024. It's an open question.
Yeah, it's kind of a Dulles brothers,
Yeah, it's like, come on, what are you doing here?
right?
We're done with that. I mean, we're not done with like influencing other countries, but like we have more sophisticated, updated ways of doing it, like Bolivia, like
Right, right. Next thing, they're going to bring back progressive rock, and we're going to have to get David Weigel on to consult with us about it. But Ryan Grimm, Washington editor for The Intercept, new book, again, let me get it right, The Squad, AOC and the Hope of a Political Revolution. Excellent read. I encourage you to read it. So as always, Ryan, thanks for the great work, and as always,
Thanks,
thanks for
RJ.
coming on the program.